Hello, and welcome to our video looking at the Spanish Civil War, which is pretty much the largest conflict that's going to happen in that interwar period leading up to World War II. Here's what we'll cover in this video. First, we'll look at the background and the causes of the Spanish Civil War. Then, we'll look at the major players and how foreign involvement turned the Civil War into kind of an international proxy war. And then finally, we'll look at the war's outcome and the long term effects. Let's go ahead and get started with some background. In the early 20th century, Spain was very much behind the rest of Europe as far as industrial development. It was still largely a peasant economy, very rural, heavily influenced by the Catholic Church, and really deeply divided by regional separatist movements. So, two examples of that are the Basques and the Catalans. These divisions would help kind of spark the conflict that's about to happen. From 1923 to 1930, Spain is under a military dictatorship from this man named Primo de Rivera and then King Alfonso XIII. But modernization in Spain isn't keeping pace with the rest of Europe, and the Great Depression hit Spain pretty hard. And Rivera ends up resigning, and the king ends up abdicating, which paves the way for a republic that did not bring the stability that it was kind of hoping it would. And out of this stems our two kind of largest factions, the Republicans and the Nationalists. Now, the Republicans are people that mostly live in cities. They're urban workers, they're landless peasants, much of the educated middle class. They're a lot more left wing. And these are the people that are kind of hoping to participate more in a lot of these industrialization projects. Now, the other side are your more traditional power holders. It's the Catholic clergy, it's the large landowners, the businessmen. These are the nationalists. They are going to have a big advantage here in this civil war because they're the ones that are going to keep what's called the Army of Morocco, which is just the best trained part of Spain's military when this conflict starts an actual civil war. Now, in 1931, this new Republican government, they try to bring out some reforms, but they don't last. And in 1936, a Popular Front coalition of leftist parties is going to win a lot of the major elections in Spain. And this terrifies some of the conservatives and the military who really fear that they're losing power and privilege. So that's what really kind of sparks this revolt that happens in July of 1936, which was a military uprising led by this man named Francisco Franco. And that's what sparks the Civil War. Here's the territory lineup kind of at the start of the Civil War. So we've got Republican Spain. Remember, those are the kind of more leftist wing that want more like radical reforms within Spain. And then the blue area is your nationalist group. Those are the traditional power holders of Spain. And this is where they start. So you'll notice that the Republican Spain ends up with two of their major cities, Madrid and Barcelona, here at the start of the Civil War. The Spanish Civil War, it's not just a national conflict. It's going to draw in different international powers and become a test run for World War II as fascist and communist powers are going to back different sides. Before we dive into kind of like who supports what, here's the basic breakdown. So, Portugal, Germany, and Italy are going to help the nationalists. And then we see democratic countries decide not to intervene. And the policy is called non intervention. And that's going to be a pretty important theme for this civil war. So, first up is France, and France is led right now by a Popular Front government. They are sympathetic to Spain's Republicans, but France was really cautious. Their military is really weak right now. They're financially really stretched. Remember, they're not getting the payments that they were supposed to be getting, and they can't count on British support anymore, and that's, really hurting them. Officially, they adopt this policy of non intervention through basically saying that they're not going to get involved, but they actually do start to smuggle arms across the border unofficially. Britain also chooses to use that non intervention policy, but they actually stay out of the war. Their conservative government under Baldwin didn't want to support leftists or fascists. They saw those as two kind of scary things. Plus, they simply just weren't ready to go into a big fight like that. They didn't have the military, they weren't financially ready for another war. So, this neutrality kind of is one of the first examples of a failure of the appeasement policy. But that's something that kind of people reflect on later. They don't really realize it at the time. Next up is Italy, led by Benito Mussolini. And Mussolini wants a nationalist Spain allied with Italy. So, despite agreeing to non intervention, he sends massive aid to Franco, up to maybe even 100,000 troops, is what we estimate. He sends all of this different, like, military supplies, and he sees the war as a chance to distract Italians from domestic problems that he's experiencing at home and expand their influence into the Mediterranean. He's really looking for allies at this point in time. Stalin, on the other hand, is going to support the Republicans. So, not out of just this pure ideology, but really to protect Soviet influence and counter fascism. Remember, communism and fascism do not mix. So, the Soviet Union, they send tanks and planes and advisors and all these different things. But Stalin also works to suppress anarchists and revolutionary socialists, consolidating communist control of the left. So, he's basically getting rid of any idea out there on the left that's not communism. That's his goal. And then there's Hitler in Germany, who also are going to back Franco. So for him, Spain is a chance to stop the spread of these left wing governments and test out his new blitzkrieg tactics, but also to build a stronger tie with Italy. Remember, he's a big fan of Mussolini. So that's going to be his like primary motivation here. Now, if you recall, the capital city of Madrid was under the initial control of the Republicans. And so Franco's initial goal is to take back Madrid. But resistance there is really fierce. The capital is bombed relentlessly. And one of the first times in history, we see that he starts to target civilians specifically to try to get them to move out of the city and save the people that live there. So he's using civilians against this Republican army. And it kind of works in a way. I mean, he doesn't win back Madrid for like most of the war, but I mean, those tactics were really challenging for the Republicans to endure. So Franco's initial attempt to conquer Madrid doesn't work. So he goes straight north and he tries to fight Republican defenses there, and he's very successful. The German, specifically German bombing of Guernica, really shocks the world about how brutal and devastating it was, especially considering this is a civil war. We also see that the Republicans are kind of having a lot of internal conflict that's really hurting their cause. Remember, the communists that are sent there to help fight with them, their real goal is not necessarily to win exactly. I mean, they want to win, but that's not like ultimately what they're there to do. They're there to spread communism. So they're trying to suppress the anarchists and the other kind of socialist groups while they do that. And it leads to a lot of infighting. It kind of all comes to a head there in Barcelona. And by March of 1939, Franco is officially able to capture the city of Madrid. And Franco's nationalists will win the war. Now, what followed wasn't really peace, but purges and more repression, as thousands of Republicans were imprisoned, executed, or exiled. One impact of this war that's kind of interesting and unique is that children were evacuated during this time period to different countries. So some of them went to Britain, some of them went to Mexico, some went to the Soviet Union, and those that went to the Soviet Union kind of largely stayed there. And they, in turn, kind of experienced World War II from behind Soviet lines, which is going to be a very different experience. But for everybody else in Spain right now, Franco's victory means the start of a brutal dictatorship that lasts until 1975. Some of the long-term impacts of this war, there's some major consequences for Europe. So first of all, democracy is weakened. So we see that these fascist states, they won in this civil war, and it really weakens the idea that democracies are strong. Fascism has triumphed, and they're seen as like a very real power to be reckoned with. We see that France and Britain look really weak. They stuck to those non intervention policies, and it brings Germany and Italy closer together and will form the Rome Berlin axis that kind of leads up to World War II. And then within Britain and France, the war really deepens political divisions. Hitler had a testing ground for modern warfare, and most importantly, Spain shows that Europe is on the brink of another major war. Like the players are already outlined, like sides have already been drawn. And although Franco stays neutral in World War II, the Spanish Civil War was basically kind of a dress rehearsal for all of this conflict that's going to be starting here in the next few years. And that's one of the biggest lasting legacies for the Spanish Civil War. All right, that's all we've got for today. Thanks for watching.